So we go all the way back through. You guys weren't even born yet when some of these advocacy wins were coming through. So I would encourage your listenership to please check those out, because it could be a nice trip down memory lane on things.
He's pretty old.
Whoa, man! Shots fired for no reason.
Yeah. Well, whatever filter you're using, it's great. It's great.
Thanks.
You talk about it privately. We talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, James Twiggins, along with my co-host, Mr. Crazy Uncle Robinson.
Yes, sir.
Want to switch it up a little bit. Tell us about our guest today, Ms. Shannon McGahn, the Chief Advocacy Officer at the National Association of Realtors. She is now a second-term guest on the show.
Yes. We got to go, quote Hamilton, we got to go inside the room where it happens with Shannon and learn, for example, about how the changes got done at the VA that allowed that process to function given the settlement. We also talked about buyer agent compensation and how that could get rolled into the loan and what that could look like in the future. And then it was really interesting to be reminded about all the things that NAR does to protect the industry and homeownership. One that I know is very valuable to anyone who is a residential real estate professional, like that 1099 status that's constantly under threat that you get to enjoy when it's tax time.
Flood insurance that they're constantly fighting with as well. Yeah, it was interesting. It was a really good recap of some of the stuff and the things they're working on. She wouldn't comment on the election, but definitely some of the issues they've been dealing with, though, that I think is very interesting for people to hear some inside knowledge on. So
great reminder of all the things they do. It was worth listening to. You'll dig it. Put it in your ears, kids.
Tune in. Shannon, welcome back to the podcast. It has been over a year since you were on the show.
How's that possible?
I mean, time has flown really fast. And ironically, your episode was before the verdict, before the settlement. It's been, I think, a pretty slow news day over the past few days. There's nothing going on with the elections.
There's an election?
There's apparently an election going on, too. Yeah.
Social media had given me no insight into people's feelings about that.
That's true. Like yesterday, I was on for like 15 minutes. I was like, and I'm done. I'm deleting my account. So welcome back, though, Shannon. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. We should do it more than once every year plus. But I think last time when I joined, it was the first time doing the podcast, and we talked for an unusually long time about Columbus Pizza and my family's business. And I'm happy to be joining you from Columbus, Ohio, where I will be having that pizza for dinner tonight. I'm very excited.
Okay, you got to send us a photo. Text us a photo. I want to see it.
Keith has a thing for Keith has a thing for pizza, and
let's be honest, Keith has a thing for food.
That's fair. I was going to say tater tots, but
tater tots are my love language.
That's his other love language. So, all right. Well, look, we got you. I know you are really, really busy, especially with what's going on in DC right now, and we wanted to talk extensively about sort of what's happening with NAR advocacy. We want to dive deep into some of these questions. I know that there's a lot of concerns around, the VA, agent compensation being financed. So we thought we'd get the expert on the line and go through some of these questions with you and just kind of pick your brain on all of this stuff. We wanted to start with like a really sort of basic approach to this. So that everybody understands what advocacy is. That word is, I don't think people really truly, even understand the meaning of what that is. And then really break it down into layman's terms for us on what is NAR advocacy, what goes on, what does that look like? And we'll start there and then we'll go into a lot more deeper questions. So. Sure.
Well, the only thing I like talking about more than Columbus-style pizza is NAR's advocacy effort. This is the envy of Washington and advocacy organizations nationwide because of decades of what our members have done to build up this operation. And it is one of the top questions that we get around the country is, what is advocacy up to? What has advocacy done for me lately? And where are we going on particular issues? So the first thing I would love the opportunity to mention is that we cover all of this in the Advocacy Scoop podcast. Sorry, gentlemen, if it's rude for me to
go plug it.
No, go nuts.
Go
podcast. But because we get these questions so often, and because we know that our members are often in their cars and driving around, and they're very, very busy and not sitting looking at NAR.realtor and refreshing the Washington report or looking at our press statements, that we wanted to bring that information in a kind of scaled down, condensed version directly to them through a podcast. So it's called the Advocacy Scoop. Please like and subscribe and listen. I refuse to listen, so I read the transcript.
I have listened, to be clear, and I think it's great because you guys are really trying to take something complicated and just kind of bring it down to digestible, content in a short amount of time, which is what, everybody lives in, like short little sound bites. So I think it's great. People should check it out.
Yeah, we'll make sure we link to it in the show notes.
Well, I appreciate that. Patrick Newton, who runs our advocacy communications and has a television background and an advocacy background. This is his great idea. And whenever we go to record it, I'm secretly hating on him. But then 20 minutes, it's done. We've got it. And we hope that this will really break through and be a source for all of our members and anyone who's interested within the real estate community to know what NAR is up to. One of the things that we address the very first few episodes are Advocacy 101 that gets into the history of our advocacy programs and what those wins are. So would highly encourage your listenership to check the Advocacy Scoop out. But we, as an advocacy organization, live the mantra that there is no such thing as a local or state or federal issue, that we are working on all three levels to ensure that those good ideas that are happening at the local level are moving to the state and federal level, and that those bad ideas that are potentially bubbling up, that we can be aware of them and know how to educate and make those arguments against it. So that has been something that we kind of have to correct sometimes, because folks will see these quarterly reports. One's coming out soon on, there's this massive lobbying spending that is happening from this national association, and they're spending tens of millions of dollars a year all on federal advocacy. And that's not the case. There is a significant portion that is federal advocacy, but by far the bulk of that funding that comes directly from our members to support our advocacy efforts is being used at the state and local level, where associations, because of what we call the three-way agreement, an association can request funding for particular issues. It could be zoning reform. We have two massive campaigns going on in California right now on two statewide ballot initiatives that could impact rent control and potential tax increases on homeownership. So those are the types of issues that we're involved with around the country. And oftentimes folks are like, oh, well, we don't see the news on that. And we're like, well, you're not in that market. So if you're not living within a particular market, you may not see like what those particular campaigns are. So that's why we have things like the Advocacy Scoop and the massive amount of resources that we put on our website to cover all of that. And I would argue that we are likely the most transparent advocacy organization out there, because everything that we do, we are adding to the Washington report. Those are any federal regulatory issues or things that are moving in the news that our members may want commentary on. So we have the Washington report. We have a Realtor Party newsletter that all of our members get that showcases what we're doing at all three levels. And then we also have the Advocacy Scoop podcast, and then all of our political activity. Everything is reported at the federal side and others. So we have information to share with you all.
I want to break this down a little bit further. So just so that I'm educating myself on this. So you're taking there's a portion of member dues that's going to advocacy that's coming up from people at the local level, the three-way agreement. So local, state, national. And you're working with, I'm assuming, local advocates, right? People that are at the state level, for example, that are working on advocacy issues. So there's people within organized real estate all across the country that are working with politicians on bills that are that are essentially good for consumers and good for housing, and then working with politicians also on bills that are bad and trying to get rid of them or influencing them in a different direction. Did I paraphrase that correctly?
Yes, you did it better than I did. Thank you. I will take that from the transcript. But it's also so worth noting that there are many different what we call realtor party programs, and so those are the different areas where we do support either policies or policymakers, and so that can be a local or state association requesting issues mobilization funds that will go to communicate directly to voters and the general public on what is occurring on a particular issue, like in California, or if there is a statewide referendum on rent control or those types of issues. There are independent expenditures where if we are going to support a candidate and have an independent fund where we're supporting that funding would also go through all of those processes as well. And then when
go a little deeper there. Go a little deeper there for me. So you say supporting a specific candidate. What does that mean? Just bring that down a little bit more.
Sure. So we support candidates and policies. So we often say our advocacy goal is to support the policies and the policymakers who support you, your business, and your customers, and the real estate economy. And so that is so there's double track there because you can do it based off of issues and just an education and public awareness campaigns, and then you can also do that through support of candidates. And we do get into the very first episode of the Advocacy Scoop podcast on what RPAC is, and that is a separately funded mechanism for federal candidates that is maintained by not by dues, but by individual contributions.
Individual contributions,
and then everything is fully disclosed as far as how it's raised and how that is spent. So RPAC is a separate entity because federal election law, campaign finance requires it's completely separate. But then we also have through the programs I just mentioned ways that we can help state associations. I
know Keith's got a question. I have one more follow up, and then I'll shut up and let him start asking. So So on every day, I'm assuming across the country, in different markets all over the US, we're dealing with different issues, different policies that are coming from politicians to influence something somewhere across the United States. Could be, at a local level, it could be at the state level, and obviously on the federal level. And so your team, how big is your team, by the way? Just a real quick answer on that, just so I have context.
Well, the team, I should preface it with we have the staff, and we have about 65 folks who are within advocacy staff. But then we also have a much larger team of grassroots through our federal political coordinators who are individual realtors who are working directly with their federal representative. And so we've got hundreds of those. And then we have more volunteers and a grassroots component as well. But on the official staff, 65 and roughly counted in DC. And then there are versions of our advocacy staff in every state and local association too.
All right. So my question then was this. If we didn't have this going on all over the US, hundreds of people working at the local level, roughly 60 plus people that's on your team at, in DC, et cetera. What happens when we don't have that kind of resource? Like what would the world look like if that was not happening, where we're down working in the trenches locally, state and federal? What are some of the outcomes that could occur?
Sure. The outcomes would be that you don't have as strong of a voice, you don't have as united of a voice, and you don't have as much input or any input on what is happening at all levels of government that relates to real estate and property ownership. So what we see is that we're one of the larger organizations, and that many other advocacy organizations that are smaller will take our leadership as to how to handle a particular issue or move forward. So not only are we leaders and a direct voice for consumers who would like to buy and sell property, and for real estate professionals across the country, but we're also working with other aligned business groups, consumer groups, multicultural groups, folks who are out there who have want to have a strong voice and home ownership, property ownership, and that we serve as the leader of many of those organizations as well.
Does the influence come from our size? Like, is that what causes? What causes a politician to listen to us besides us sitting down?
Yeah, dollars.
No, I wouldn't. There are many components here, but I think there's a huge difference between the size of an organization and the reach of an organization and the relationships that an organization and the research that an organization has. And because we have all three of those, we're in every single zip code. You're not going to find a policymaker who's like, I don't know anyone who's with the realtors. I don't know anyone. Like they are going to have these strong relationships, and many of them directly from the local level because they have come up through running for office. They may have been in city council and then ran for state rep, and then you run for Congress. And so there can be decades in many cases of these types of relationships. But I think it's that reach that we have throughout the country, and that we do it in a very nonpartisan, bipartisan, just relationship-focused way. There are many organizations out there who you can tell just by the group, like, they support one or the other. And I would argue that we are the best situated as being able to talk to both sides of the aisle, and more importantly, bring them together. Like we help get co-sponsors on one side. Well, hey, we need a House Democrat and a House Republican. Who can we talk to? And advocate for who can be co-sponsors on bills, and really just help to unify that advocacy arrangement and make sure that we're getting things done.
So Keith mentioned money. Like, let's broach that. Obviously money influences everything, but where does that fit into the equation? Is it we have resources that can
with you, but it is a tool. It is one tool because you want to be able to, in supporting those elected officials, you want to be able to contribute to them. But federal law, there's a $5,000 limit on how much you can directly give to a campaign, and that hasn't changed in decades. And those campaigns used to cost, like $1 million for a House race, and they're getting into tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars for Senate races. And then look at presidential. So there's just the amount of those funding resources that are in the political ecosystem is extraordinary, and ours is very important. And because we do give, last cycle, we gave 50-50, that we are kind of a microcosm of the country, and looking at how Congress is set up, and that we have a 98% success rate. We are looking at what races that we have good relationships and where they can win, and those are getting potentially a $5,000 PAC check, and you can do for primary, and you can give to general. And so those are important, and we do have the largest PAC in the country, but there are a lot of other funding streams that are out there that are much bigger outside of the PAC world.
Keith, go.
I have some, I guess, more just like base level questions, right? So you mentioned that in the podcast that you have the first few episodes, you talked about wins through advocacy. I think while structure of advocacy matters to some folks, especially people very interested in politics and the machinations of politics, there's a lot of people successfully operating a real estate business or a real estate company who kind of care, but not a lot, right? About the bigger stuff. Give me an example of a win or a really big win through advocacy that we may not be aware of or we've forgotten about. Like when you pat yourself on the back when you're getting family style pizza, what are you most proud of that you guys have accomplished, or you and the team have accomplished over the years? What do you think about? Like, what are the wins?
Sure. Well, over the years, we have decades of these advocacy wins that we have aggregated. We have on our website, nar.realtor/advocacy wins. So we go all the way back through. You guys weren't even born yet when some of these advocacy wins were coming through. So I would encourage your listenership to please check those out, because it could be a nice trip down memory lane on things.
He's pretty old.
Whoa, man! Shots fired for no reason.
Well, whatever filter you're using, it's great. It's great. But I would prefer talking about the ones I've been part of NAR now 5.5, almost 6 years, and so the ones that are kind of fresh and that I would have firsthand knowledge of are things like protecting independent contractor status. Nearly 90% of Realtor members are are independent contractors and choose to be so. That is one of the, it's a feature, not a bug. It's one of the reasons why many wanted to go into this profession. And we've had at the state level times when that has been questionable, or questioned, but we have in the past few years seen that this is happening at the national level with potential legislative action. I think 1-2 Congresses ago, and now we are working with the administration on a rule that has come out that we're clarifying to make sure that it's not applicable to our members. And so that is something that we are flying into California, flying in New Jersey folks to go and have these meetings directly with agency officials, directly with the White House. Just recently met with a very senior staffer over at the White House to discuss these issues, and we're getting very favorable feedback. So protecting the ability of real estate professionals to do the business in the way that they know it should be conducted. That's a very important win there. And then there are other areas where it's kind of a macro issue that it might not just impact real estate professionals, but it impacts the entire real estate economy and the ability to transfer property for private property rights. One of our really big wins was the CDC eviction moratorium. If you all want to take that trip down memory lane, that in the early days of the COVID pandemic, the CDC issued an eviction moratorium and said, okay, we know that there are many of these programs out there, like there's PPP and CARES and unemployment benefits and all of these things that are out there to make sure that we still have a strong economy and that people are still able to keep those working relationships as we are in a lockdown. However, if you are a property owner and you are renting to tenants, that you cannot kick them out during COVID. Even if there was a pre-existing problem or the lease was up and you had you needed to have access to that property, or you were going to sell it in order to retire, there could be all these different cases, and none of those were accounted for in the CDC's orders. And we saw that and we're immediately like, the CDC doesn't have the authority to do that. Like Congress, I would argue, they could do it, but
may or may not, right?
Right, because these are private property laws. That's like a taking. Right. Like you can't just go and say this property, now you can't do anything with it until we say so. So our Georgia and Alabama associations, they worked with plaintiffs and were able to successfully sue the CDC. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. Twice. The first time the Supreme Court said, we agree, but it's going to expire. It'll be okay. If Congress doesn't, Congress would need to act to continue it. And then the administration continued it and Congress went for a vote and we said, okay, and took it back to the Supreme Court. We also, at that point, educated Congress and advocated that they not extend the eviction moratorium. And instead, what we had been arguing for is rental assistance. If you want to assure that renters are able to stay in their homes, provide the same type of assistance that you are for people to stay in their jobs. And this is also fair to the property owners who are paying the mortgage, they're paying insurance, they're paying property tax. There was no, hey, you don't have to pay property tax this year.
Right.
So all of those things.
I wonder why. That's so strange that they didn't waive that one.
Right. I think so. It's fundamentally unfair to property owners. And when we won at the Supreme Court, that lawsuit, that decision has been mentioned or used in a number of other cases that have had some pretty strong regulatory
Shannon,
impact.
this is the stuff. This is the kind of stuff we have to figure out, which you're doing. I'm not, this isn't a criticism, but this is the stuff that we just have to figure out how to get out more, and people need to hear more, with all the press that our industry's had. It's like the positives are being, shut out as well.
Shannon, you should just go around the country doing 2-minute keynotes. And you just walk on stage. No, I'm serious. You walk on stage and you say, raise your hand if you like the 1099 status. All the hands go up. You're welcome. Mic drop. Walk off.
Bye.
Like when people talk about burning NAR to the ground, and I understand people's frustrations with NAR. I understand them, but how you feel is often a terrible indicator of what you should do, right? And if you don't take the time to take a breath and really understand the advocacy and NAR advocacy and how that impacts and influences what we do, even like just keep my 1099 status forever, and I'll send you my money for the rest of my, like, until I'm retired, because that's the real value there is massive. And too often I think people forget.
Well, that's a good segue, Keith, too. So let's take it to kind of more current stuff. You're talking about wins. Let's talk about VA. Obviously, settlement occurred. Verdict, settlement, which can have obviously some implications that we're all trying to follow. How does it affect, minorities, low-income Americans, veterans? So, talk to us about that. Like, where did you guys step in? I'm assuming immediately to start having this. Well, I know you guys have. So you've been having lots of discussions with VA. Like, talk to us about that process of, okay, here's the settlement, here's the positives, and here's the negatives potentially. Like, we got to deal with this. So give us that kind of timeline of what started, and then how you've been able to affect some of these changes already in a positive way.
Oh, absolutely. And this is a great recent example of the impact that NAR advocacy has and how quickly that we can move. So the VA's home loan guarantee was the only program that explicitly bans buyers from directly paying for professional real estate representation. So with the settlement, there are the two big changes to the settlement to the industry are the use of buyer representation agreements, and then not including the commission on the MLS. And because they were the only program that said you can't pay, that means that there has to be a lot more education and communication, in particular with VA buyers, because you want to make sure that they know that they can ask for the seller to pay. So in light of the settlement, we launched an all hands on deck advocacy effort on the issue. We had long opposed the language that VA had been using. It was in a handbook. It was not very clear where the express intent of Congress was on this. And so we had before met with VA officials and others, but it had not been a problem with folks being able to get their loan. So this is something that we had made sure that they knew about, but it wasn't, in politics and DC and everywhere else, if something is urgent, that gets in front of you a lot faster. When the settlement happened, we were talking to these VA officials. We engaged with lawmakers. When we had our fly-in, which is our big industry, we got thousands of realtors in DC coming to meet with their members of Congress. This was a major talking point. And we have many of our members of Congress who are friends on the Hill who are veterans themselves, or they work with the veteran community, and they were aware of this and said, okay, we're calling over to VA. We're trying to figure out, why they have this language, how quickly we can change it. Does this need an act of Congress? Does this need a rulemaking? What are the different options here? And then the VA did report, within a matter of weeks, that it will temporarily lift this until they deem it necessary to engage in a formal rulemaking. So they basically said, we're not enforcing this. We're going to lift this for now. We're going to see what next steps. Please stop calling us. That was essentially what the message was. And this was a huge and very timely win. And it's really, it's a testament to our realtors who came to DC, who made these phone calls. We met with, I think, 98% of Hill offices during that time where this came up as a top issue. And so without this change, you would see veteran buyers could be denied access to the use of professional representation as they're going through the American dream of homeownership. When you had the GI Bill passed and others, like, the whole idea is, how do we help folks who serve and get into a home, and this completely alters that course. And so we're going to continue. We're a huge fan, as President Reagan said, trust but verify. And yes, this is we were very grateful to be work so quickly. And with this decision, but we'll continue to work with Congress and to see if there needs to be a legislative fix, or if rulemaking can change that down the road.
Do you think this will be a permanent fix long term? Just curious. You do? Yeah. Okay. So then you guys worked with the NBA on that as well, right? So you got together with other advocacy arms to...
Yep. We have a great relationship with the mortgage bankers, the home builders, American Bankers Association. We all work very closely together, but no offense to our NBA fans, they didn't have 9,000 people in town during this.
Yeah, no, but my point was when... I think the interesting... You guys are, the minute basically, to your comment, I think, which is interesting, is if there's enough noise, Congress listens, and then it becomes conversations and everyone's like, okay, they're driving me nuts. Like, we need to solve this issue. Is that and I want to move on because this is another question I want to do, but the amount of voices and the push coming from an industry is what drives a lot of these conversations. So is that fair to say? Like, just...
It's a stew. There are a lot of tools that are available and a lot of things that we can do. Like one instance of this is the National Flood Insurance Program, which, as you know, is something that has long been a point of contention because I was a longtime staff director at the Financial Services Committee. We're the committee that manages that, and getting bipartisan support for a overhaul of this program has proven to be very difficult over the last decade plus, to say it politely. And then we have long looked for reforms that would help to strengthen the program, but also want to make sure that there will not be a lapse. Right now, you're middle of hurricane season and others. You want to make sure that that's not going to happen. And it was attached to government funding bills, which is a good thing. I'm not trying to get too wonky about this, but it's a good thing to have something attached to a government funding bill, because that means they have to vote on that bill at some point. It's going to move. And if it's on its own, you can just kind of just not vote on it. But it's a bad thing when you start seeing folks talking about a shutdown. And so this was in October. That's the end of the fiscal year last year. And we were looking at a potential shutdown showdown. And we put out a call for action, which we rarely do. We try to use these only when they're very important, because you don't want to be the boy who cried wolf and start sending out a call for action once a month on bills that could easily pass. And this one, we put out a call for action. I think it was on a Friday night. Pretty sure I was at like a football game trying to yep, this language looks great. Go for it. Let's get this out the door like tonight. And then by like Saturday around lunchtime, members of Congress are like texting us like, we got it. Okay. Like we heard, like, is the flood insurance bill, is it in this bill? And we're like, yes, it is. And they're like, is it the one that we're passing? Yes. And it passed with massive bipartisan support in the House and Senate. Not saying it's all because of flood, but
sure,
that anecdotally, what we're hearing is like, we hear you. We understand. And that we had I think 20,000 contacts go out within like just a matter of
that's the power.
So those are the types of things. It's about education. It's about having the trust of those relationships too. You're not just saying, hey, I don't know who you are, but please do this, or I demand you do this. It's, that we would not have this issue if we didn't think this was really important, and we have the research to back it up, and we have the policy subject matter experts and the on the ground real estate professional experts to tell you this, and all of those together really help to solidify our position and get things done.
Keith,
so piggybacking on that, you mentioned the power of just the sheer numbers of residential real estate professionals. And there's been some agent attrition because of the difficulties of the market, probably will increase as some of this shifts. How important is the size of the body, the group, and how could that affect NAR advocacy in the future?
Sure. So we represent 1.5 million realtors. We also work with a 501c4 that we support called the American Property Owners Alliance that has close to around 10 million consumers within that database as well. And so we're not just communicating directly with realtors and real estate professionals around the country, but also with the consumers who are directly impacted by the ability for them to buy and sell homes. And then also within our commercial space, we're working with tens of thousands, I think more than that, of commercial folks who are very active, both with our organization and others. And so these are all different areas that are consistently communicating in the advocacy space. So there's quantity, which is important, but there's also the quality of those conversations and those relationships. And I mentioned earlier, we have the program called the Federal Political Coordinator. I know it just rolls off the tongue, but this is one of the most amazing programs that we have as an organization. And I get asked all the time from other folks, like, how did you guys develop that? And how can we copy it? I'm like, you just can't, because those relationships don't happen overnight. And so that is every single federal elected official has a person. And this could be someone who sold them their first home. It could be a neighbor. It could be like their college roommate, but like somebody who applies for this position who says, I have a relationship and I would like to be the point of contact in this person's state or district. And then we have the ability to evaluate it and see how it's going. And but ideally, in many of these cases, it's somebody who can get that person on the phone right away and say, we've got this issue. Can you take a look at it? And then just really develop that relationship, that friendship, the education, and the expertise that's needed.
Unpack that a little bit. Did I hear you right that basically you have a residential real estate insider for every politician? And no, I mean, like everybody?
For every federal elected official. And, some relationships are stronger than others, of course. But,
of course. Right.
But we also we put teams together. So if we know that someone, they may want this position, but they don't have that relationship yet, let's find other folks who could be a good voice and to help represent the real estate community within that district. So that's what you call a grass tops campaign. Grassroots is much more call for action. How do you get
grass tops? I've never heard that one.
Yeah. It's an advocacy.
This is so funny to me. I'm sorry, Keith. I'm gonna go on my soapbox, but I love these parts.
I love it when you do this. Go.
It just listening to all of this stuff just makes me smile at the American Real Estate Association. It just like what a complete load of nonsense that's going to be to even try to get any type of influence in DC. I mean, like when I read the post about they sent a letter to VA, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like nobody even read the damn thing. Like it's all about relationships and connections. I have a follow up here before I go further on that one. So you made a comment that I think is really important. You said that if it's not an issue or a fire, you didn't say fire, but it kind of implied for Congress, they're not really going to pay attention to it. So everyone mobilized on VA really fast, and it was very quick, by the way, on how I think I'm making an assumption, but for Washington standards and all of that stuff, to get things to move along that quickly, it felt like it was fast. I want to pivot here because this is a big one and everyone's talking about it. So Keith and I, and as well as a lot of others in the industry, recognize that there's a future coming where sellers are going to be, more adverse than they were before of offering to pay buyers agents compensation. And so, we've been saying for some time that there needs to be a mechanism for the buyer to be able to finance their agent's compensation in the loan if the seller is not willing to pay anything, to be competitive in a multi-offer environment, right? That's the scenario that could be a result from the settlement. So I've been educated by some people on the difficulty of that. But my question is it going to take, first explain what would have to happen for that to occur, so everybody has an understanding of what that BHAG looks like. And then number two, is it going to take massive issues for Congress to take that up, or for Fannie and Freddie to take that up, where it's like we're seeing people getting screwed by being unrepresented on deals and they can't afford to get in a house? Like, give us that scenario, unpack all that for us so everyone that's listening can understand what that means. Like, is that possible? Will it ever happen? Why not? If so, what will it take? All of those things.
Well, first, thank you for bringing up the multi-offer environment, because one of the challenges that we've had in educating lawmakers over the past several years, and just kind of what's going on, is that if you haven't bought or sold a home recently, you're not familiar with that environment. Maybe folks had a while ago, but I mean, it's as you all know, it's gotten pretty crazy out there. And when you're saying, for instance, in the VA process, that you're going to have a half dozen offers like after an open house, if not more, and one of those are not going to go in with a real estate professional, I mean, that you're already at a competitive disadvantage. And so that's something that we've been educating lawmakers on, just what that environment looks like from the buyer and seller perspective. As far as the kind of like what we call what federally financing of commissions, roughly 40 states and the entire federal housing finance system have either explicitly or implicitly endorsed the current commission structure. So that changing that would be a major overhaul that would have some potential severe unintended consequences that would take a lot of research to study. And I think in order for that to move forward, I would argue that it would require, or I think it would require Congress to do that, because I have long worked in housing finance issues on Capitol Hill and know that it is something that post a financial crisis that many have tried, including my old boss and many folks I've worked with, and it has proven to be impossible to get something done in a bipartisan way. However, as you mentioned before, like the common saying on politics is, you've got to put the urgent in front of the important, and some things can be urgent and important, and that's what typically gets their attention. So as you noted, when the settlement happened, we had been discussing with FHA, FHFA, sorry for those listening, I'll have a whole list in the notes on all the acronyms.
Acronyms, yeah.
Remember them half the time, I'll mess it up. But to say, like, would this require that interested party contributions from sellers contribute to buyers' costs, or would that have to be adjusted, or would this be handled as it always has been, allowing a buyer to finance the commission? And they got back to us very, very quickly and in writing. It's all on our website. We have it all at, I think it's all on facts.realtor. That it'll be the same model as long as this traditionally has been managed, that it can still be managed the same way. So that just presents more communications challenges. You just need to make sure that through a buyer's representation agreement, and as our professionals are working with clients, that they're communicating through all of that. And from what I have heard anecdotally from the many, many, many professionals I speak with on a weekly basis, is that the sellers are fully understanding that. So what we have to do as an organization and as an industry is to look at the markets, monitor the markets, show where there could be potential failures or issues that you would potentially need a change at the federal level, because it would be a very big change at the federal level, likely with Congress getting involved. For instance, like the GSEs, like they've been in conservatorship for over 15 years. Britney Spears got out of conservatorship and the GSEs have not. So this has been a challenge for Congress to be able to say, what does the future of housing finance look like? And I think because we've had such a strong professional real estate community that it's been managed very well, but at some point they will have to look into that. And at that point, would we educate and say, here's a segment of the market who are having trouble with financing, or that we're seeing that sellers are doing X, Y, or Z? And that is where our team, we have an amazing research team, Dr. Lawrence Yoon and Dr. Jessica Lautz, who lead it. And they are experts on what is happening within the real estate economy. And we are consistently sharing their research reports and data with lawmakers, both at the federal level and around the country. And Lawrence gets asked to testify. We are the point person on this. And so what I would argue that we would do at this point is we have to monitor it, but we also have to understand that if there were that type of the financing of commissions, that act would increase monthly payments for the buyer, and that is something that we need to take into consideration as well, is that they harmed by having stronger or higher prices there.
So I'm going to paraphrase that and basically say there needs to be urgency that would have to occur. You got to have data to back it up that a certain segment of the consumer is being harmed by these changes. And then from there, there's a ton of work to go through, potentially an act of Congress to figure out how to finance that compensation into the loan, how it might affect, what they're paying, the terms, assuming buybacks, all sorts of things that would be involved in that process. So it sounds like it's go ahead, Keith.
Here's what I heard. May not happen, and certainly won't happen anytime soon. So get really good at having the conversation with your buyers and sellers so that they understand the reality of where we are today in time and space. Like this isn't, the cavalry is not coming over the hill from the financial services industry anytime soon.
Well, and to get the good at listening and then good at sharing what those situations look like so that we know from the perspective of the consumer. And again, we do that through many different channels, but so that we know if there are particular cases where we see someone harmed, which is exactly what we did with the VA loan issue. And we had examples of here is somebody who was told, absolutely not, you can't fund, you can't pay for this. And then we're taking that to VA and saying, is this what you had in mind? And so our job is to tell your story, to tell the story of real estate professionals around the country and their consumers. And if that is the policy solution, I should also get into, as much as I love talking policy with you all, and I've done this for a living for the bulk of my life, I don't create the policy. The lobbying team doesn't create the policy. Our policies are all created by our members and through a committee system. We have more committees than Congress does, and we have so they analyze.
We know. That can be good and bad, by the way. But your point's valid. Yes. Yeah.
Well, it does make sure that, and then those policy decisions do go before the larger body, and so it does make sure that we don't have one or two different policy proposals that are out there that could be conflicting with each other, and that we are united as an organization when we are able to go to the Hill and to the administration and say we are speaking on behalf of our 1.5 million members.
Okay. We've got like 5 minutes, and I want to wrap a couple questions into this. Number one is, what are the biggest issues that NAR is facing in DC or as an industry? We'll say that. Piggyback that on. Obviously, there's been a lot of news in the election process. We've got Biden, out, potentially Harris being the nominee. We'll see how that all plays out. We've got Trump. So number one, what are some of the big issues that, NAR is facing in DC that you're working on? And then two, we'd love to hear your take on, what you think the next administration will play both out. If it's a Trump administration and we'll say a Harris administration, just for conversation's sake, what does that bode for positives or negatives potentially for our industry? Let's wrap both those questions kind of together.
Sure. So I think we mentioned, independent contractor status. There are several issues that are very important to cover this year. But one of the biggest issues, I would say, is the expiration of key provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So that was the big tax bill that was passed in 2017. I worked at the Treasury Department as a senior advisor during that time. So saw how the sausage is being made and working with Capitol Hill, including the speaker, the leader, the key committee chairs on how that all came together. And it's going to be fun is one word for it, but it's going to be interesting to see how this all happens again in 2025. Because in 2017, you had one party controlling House, Senate, and White House, so they were able to use the reconciliation process. And that's a budget process that essentially says you can just do it with a simple majority vote. You don't need a supermajority in the Senate. And so you're able to, if you can get something through committee, you're basically able to get it onto the floor. And there are a lot of what ifs for the next Congress. We don't know who's going to control the House, Senate, or the White House. And so we have a great political team who works with consultants and pollsters in our states and everyone, and they can all speculate all they want. But the answer is we do not know what it is going to look like in 2025. So we have spent the last two Congresses since I've been here at NAR working on bipartisan tax bills that we can help get through the Ways and Means Committee, because all tax bills have to start in the House. And so the Ways and Means Committee is where all the action is. So how can we get bipartisan tax bills that will positively impact real estate, that will increase inventory, that will make it easier to buy and sell homes, so that when they do take this up, if it is done in a bipartisan way, which it may have to be, depending on how it all lines up, that we have that momentum going on there. So, for instance, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act had zero support from Democrats, but it's likely that we will have more bipartisan support in 2025, because otherwise you're going to see key provisions change, and no one wants to say they're responsible for raising taxes. We have on our maybe more websites to look at, flyin.realtor, flyin.realtor. That's where we keep all of our up-to-date Capitol Hill talking points, because the fly-in is in May, and so we developed that as like, here's what we're doing in May to discuss these issues. And then we also, August, a lot of people think August is a very sleepy month. It is not in realtor world. So members of Congress are back home. They're in their districts. They're usually either, campaigning or doing community meetings. And we make sure that we are touching base with federal officials in August. They're happier during that time. They typically are
they're home.
Office. They've had lunch. They're not running to a markup. They don't have a ton of staff around them. And so being able to visit with members and their staff in August is a very key time. And so we updated all the talking points for that. So tax reform is a big one. One of the huge issues that is always mentioned in it was mentioned in President Biden during the campaign. It was mentioned in his budgets and will likely come up again, are threats to 1031 like-kind exchange. And for most folks listening to this will know exactly what that is, but we have a wealth of resources that's basically they want to increase the capital gains rate, and so in order to have that as a pay for other things. And we had that come up in the tax bill last Congress, and educated members of the Ways and Means Committee advocated that you don't want to touch 1031 because this brings more economic generates more economic activity. It is fair because you're saying if you're selling one property and you are buy a bigger property, that you're not going to pay more in taxes, so then you can't afford that bigger property, so it's counterproductive. And you still, it's not a tax break. It is a deferral. You're still paying at the final sale. You're just rolling it into the next one. So our advocacy team and our FPCs were absolutely phenomenal. So not only did the president's request that we get a pay for out of that not get voted or not move through the Ways and Means Committee or the House, it didn't even come up for a vote. They didn't even bring it up. It was just such a non-starter because everyone understood how important that program is. But there's always next Congress, and there's always other folks who are willing to take a stab at it. So we have to always be prepared, and that's a huge issue for us. So those education campaigns will continue, and that there'll be infrastructure and other issues. And I'm not going to speculate on the different White Houses. You guys can.
I was about to pin you on that. I was like, she's not going to do it. I can tell you right now.
Smart.
All right. So, Keith, any final questions you wanted to throw in there?
I do have one quick one, mostly just from a tactical standpoint. One of the things I wasn't aware of is how involved you are at the local level. If someone listening has something locally that they're really passionate about and they want to get that to you and the team to pay attention to, what's the mechanism to that? They just email you, Shannon? Is that what they? No, probably not.
Sure. Well, actually, if you're passionate and active at the local level, you should have a relationship with your local association, and they are the ones who will initiate support. So because of the three-way agreement, to make sure that there's, you have local, state, and federal governments, they don't agree on anything. Through NAR, we have an agreement where we make sure that we are not using resources to fight against each other, and that instead that we are going to come to agreement and use our resources to positively advance what we're working on. So I would say talk to your local association, and they talk to their state. Make sure if it's something that's big enough to get the National Association's resources, the local and state can help apply for that. And there are government affairs directors, GAD's another acronym for you all, who are at the local, basically versions of me and my team at the local and state level, and they work to get these done.
Shannon, I'm going to kind of put a pin on this and say that, first of all, thank you for all the work that you do. I'm going to speak for the industry in a lot of ways here. Keith and I obviously run a really large company. We have over 6,000 agents within the business. We're tied down doing just minutia every day, and we benefit. We run the operations, right? We're out helping our people, help consumers. And so we don't even know half the stuff that goes on. But on behalf of the industry that doesn't pay as much attention as we should, thank you for all of that, because without the work that you're all doing, we would be unemployed, put it bluntly. 1099 status going away would kill the industry. Keith and I have done enough research to know what it would look like if you had to employ everybody.
Yeah, it would definitely reshape it. It would reshape it.
And what I also heard was, I love this, the fly-in.realtors, what you said? Was that the link? Okay. So this is something that I'll tell everybody that's listening to do. You all need to go download that or go look at it, whatever it is. You should be talking about these issues locally as well, so that buyers and sellers understand that you're not just a salesperson, that you're not there just helping them buy a house, but that you're part of a group of people that are advocating for homeownership rights, that this is the largest asset most people will own. It creates generational wealth. All of these things are happening, and part of the profession goes deeper than that. So I hope that despite all of the things that are going on, that everyone listening continues to support the National Association of Realtors, because there are a lot of really great things you guys are doing. And I'm glad you're starting to highlight that stuff and be more transparent about it. I know you hate doing the podcast, but you're really good at it. So keep it up. So,
I appreciate you putting a spotlight on all of our advocacy efforts, and I'm very proud of our organization and our team and all that we've accomplished. And I know that there is so much more, and the more we can talk about it and share the better. And please like and subscribe to the Advocacy Scoop podcast. If you don't mind another shameless plug there. And
you're fine.
Nope.
We want people to do it. So, and by the way, if you see,
share information with you and your listeners.
Of course, and we appreciate having you on. We'll have you back on again as more stuff is being updated. And if all of you get to see Shannon in person, go give her a high five and say thank you, because she does an incredible job, and her team do an incredible job on making sure that we're all employed. So
yeah, thanks for all the hard work.
Thanks, Shannon, for coming on again. We appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
It's our job to say out loud what everybody's only thinking to themselves. It's your job to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode.